All right, guys, thanks so much for listening to another episode of the CX Chronicles Podcast. Super excited as Bill Staikos is joining us today. Bill, say hello to the CX Nation, my friend.
How do you doing, CX Nation? How y'all doing? Good to be here, Adrian.
So this is going to be, Bill and I were just talking about it, guys, before we jumped into this one, but it's going to be a fun one. Bill has, number one, he's got a ton of awesome, relevant customer experience, customer success, employee experience, experiences that he's going to talk about today. But number two, and selfishly, I think this is probably the coolest part, Bill. Bill's got this awesome podcast that probably many of you, frankly, have been listening to called Be Customer Led. And, very similar to the stuff that we get into every single solitary week here, guys, at CX Chronicles, Bill is talking with incredible subject matter experts from across the world and all these cool companies. He's got his own amazing style of kind of breaking down what are they doing to build, curate, and create more of those types of experiences. So this is going to be a fun one, Bill. I feel like I'm talking to another fellow CX, ninja.
We're brethren, man. We're CX brethren,
Exactly, man. So Bill, why don't you start off, man? Set the stage. I'd love to kind of just start off with your background, man. How did you get into this whole wild world? What were some of the stepping stones in your personal career and your personal journey that got you to where you are today, my friend?
Yeah. So I'll take it way back to like 6 years old, if that's cool. I'll land the plane really quickly.
Okay.
My parents emigrated from Greece in the late 60s, and I'm gonna totally generalize here, but a lot of Greeks own diners, right? So yeah. They did. And I worked in that diner from a super young age. So I got this sort of like really great, like foundational, just service mindset, just ingrained from a really early age. And not only just service mindset from a customer perspective, but also service mindset from an employee perspective. Fast forward, then I'm like 26 and I was working at JP Morgan in investment banking. I was like, I've got this all figured out. This is what I want to do. And if I read like another bond indenture, I thought I was going to jump, like that's it. Like this is the end of me, because they're really long and really boring. Not to disparage anyone who does that for a living, but I read Joe Pine's book, The Experience Economy, in 1999. And it literally was like, it connected my life growing up with that service mindset with like an actual job. And I was like, this is it. This is what I got to go do with my life. And I quit. My boss at the time looked at me like I had three heads. Like you're 26, you're making a really good living for a 26-year-old, frankly. Like I was probably being paid more than I should have been. But then I went into go work for like a small, like market research-based consultancy and started cutting my teeth there. And then it just grew and evolved. I started getting, out of market research into consulting and strategy, then kind of more into the design side, and then bringing together VOC, insights, analytics with design and with, culture, and seeing the power of those three things working together. And that's really where I've tried to focus my career.
That's awesome. So, Bill, the first question I have for you, it's I guess more of a comment, but like growing up in a family that owns a diner, runs a diner, has customers every single solitary day, has wildly different sets of expectations walking in their door every single solitary day, different flavors, different appetites, all that fun stuff. Talk about an incredible grooming ground, my friend, to get into the world of just understanding how the hell you even have to listen to people, pay attention to signals, pay attention to things that are experiences that are going really, really well versus experiences where you can tell from the first conversation the time that the waitress shows up at the time the waiter shows up at the table. But I love like to kind of just understand like how did you know at an early age that was the type of thing that like excited you, enjoyed you, or was it just a product of environment where it was what your family was doing? It was where you probably spent a lot of your time when you were a kid. I just have to ask.
Yeah, it was a little bit of both, frankly, right? I mean, I really enjoyed that time. I thought that I was going to open up a diner at one point. I told my dad once, he's like, don't go into this business, go do something better with your life, which is really good counsel. That is an incredibly difficult business. One, and then two, to be really successful as a restaurateur or even just owning a diner, it's really, it's stressful work. And, for me, it was about, and diners are really interesting metaphors for businesses generally, right? Because you've got back of the house or like operations in the kitchen, you got front of the house, the servers and and others, and being able to explore both of those and everyone goes to the diner. The CEO goes to the diner, the trucker goes to the diner, right? So like you really do see like a really interesting breadth of customers as well.
Big time.
And you understand the importance of, this is why I'm not a big fan of personas, frankly, because everyone is so different. Everyone, not everyone comes in and gets scrambled eggs and bacon, right? So, I learned from early on that the different tastes, different attitudes, the way people sat in their seat with their families, like what they liked, what they didn't like, and really tried to create an experience for them to have them keep coming back, whether that was just every Saturday, because that's what they did. Whether that was like every morning before they would go to work. We had folks coming in every single morning at the same time. I'm going to get my sandwich, I'm going to get my coffee, and that's what I'm going to do. Right. So, really being able to pivot and truly understand your customers and get deep in there and create relationships. It was just such great, just fertile, just learning. It was just awesome.
I can imagine. It makes me think about a lot of the founders that come on the show, Bill, and they're constantly focused, and they have to be there. They're focused on revenue curation. They're focused on revenue acceleration, and they're focused on revenue retention, right?
Yeah.
But what you're making me think about is like, even you're right. The diner is an incredible business metaphor, because you just laid out this awesome line of like, when you're thinking about lifetime value and you're thinking about customer retention and repeat customer visits and repeat customer buys, talk about your dailies versus your weeklies, maybe versus your monthlies. Folks, it's just, it's the one Sunday after church that they pop in per month or whatever, if that's what they can kind of afford. But that's kind of cool, man. It's a really good foundation that you sent kind of laid out for yourself there early on in life.
And you know what? We didn't have NPS. We didn't have customer sat scores, right? Like we didn't do any of that stuff. I mean, the technology, no one would do like, they didn't want to put out like a questionnaire and a card or anything either, but like, it was just really just being there, observing, understanding who your customers are, and then tailoring your behavior to meet those needs. And then the revenue would come. Right. And it did. They were, fairly successful, which we were really fortunate for.
Love it, man. That's awesome. So then, Bill, later on, as you kind of move forward into the career, you mentioned you had to make a big change, make big pivot early. Many folks do. I feel like this is becoming, and this is an interesting part of today's episode. I want to feel free to I think what's interesting about some of the stuff that we're doing, Bill, you've got a lot of these same types of incredible stories, journeys, these different walks of life. And I think we both try to call out in our shows, just like, guys, there's a million different paths to becoming an incredible customer focused business leader. Every one of us had to go through a different set of obstacles, a different set of just things that we preferred about our own lives, or decisions that kind of brought us through different doors. But with you, man, so when you made that big change and you took kind of a risk leaving a great job, what were the first couple of years like after that? So like, what was it like leading up? And I'm trying to lead us up to like to the amazing team that you're running today at Medallia. But like, what were some of those couple of years like, kind of learning at a research insight company, trying to, maybe it wasn't as good of a job or as consistent as a job, but what were those first couple of years like? Did it feel like you made the right decision? Did it immediately feel like you had some regret? What was that like?
I felt like I was home, man. I really did. It was like, I had to get to understand, like, how do you, then it was like SPSS and doing analysis in SPSS, right? So like I was learning new tools and growing that way. I think, being able to put, sort of my customer lens on and really trying to understand and go deep on that data to understand like what is really happening here. So we can create these great research reports. And we were doing like work for like HP, Microsoft, particularly at that role in the small and mid-market business space. So they were targeting small and mid-market businesses. They were using us to do work around, like, help us understand the space so we can penetrate better. One of the cool things, I did conjoint analysis on the first Palm Pilot and helped price that out. Kind of dating myself pretty badly right now, but that kind of stuff. I was like, this is it. I made the right move. It was just the hardest part was just learning the new toolkit, right? And the new kind of lingo. And, that was the hardest bit, but I was really dedicated to it. Like, once you kind of find your calling, your purpose, you're like, this is it, man. I'm all in now. Right. So, and it was, it got to a point where I was like, okay, I've been there, done that. I want to evolve. I want to grow. I want to see where else I could take this space. And, I've worked for a couple of different, consulting companies along the way. And then I went to the client side, and there was when the light bulb really went off for me, because I wanted to go back. I wanted to the client side because I just thought I would never be a great consultant without walking a mile in my client's shoes. And there I realized how little I actually knew about sort of operationalizing customer experience. It's very different than dropping a presentation or giving one and saying, here's where you should focus, and here are the 4 things that you should do next. Very different to say, okay, we're going to take these 4 now and we're going to actually put them into practice and what that entails. And that was another eye-opening experience for me. And that was just a whole new level of fun.
Well, I'm super happy that you just opened that can of worms, because I think you could probably go on for hours and hours and hours talking.
I'm sure
about,
we both could, right?
But just I was going to say, Bill, it's the art of operationalizing customer experience and customer success. It's absolutely math and science, primarily math and science driven. But I say art because there is the whole other world of, you have to get humans to do things at certain time. It's a dance, man. It's like trying to figure out how to make all these different moves happen at the same time. The other thing too, let's call it what it is. Every business and every executive team within that business has got different goals. They've got different ambitions. They've got different drivers. Maybe it's all about just simply driving profit valuation. Maybe other folks, they actually did pick a business that they built where it's like, no, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. So like whether I'm a billionaire or whether I'm barely paying the bills, like this is what I'm doing. But that becomes another part of the art and the dance, which is like getting the tools that you need, getting the team in place, right? Thinking about how you're going to orchestrate the processes. So that's like a whole other world that we could literally go on and on and on about. But it must have been eye-opening for you. And I my question is, what are like the two or three things that you kind of came away from knowing, as you got deeper into your career, you were going to have to be really, really good at figuring out that art or figuring out that song and dance?
Well, one, you've got I think the ability to communicate value from a customer perspective and make it relevant for a business owner is super important. So like your communication skills, you got to work on them all the time. I actually think that my communication skills are better because of those days in the diner and understanding how different folks talk, right? So like, right, that CEO talks very, very differently when they're ordering food than the truck driver is, right? Totally. So no one's better or worse, but they're talking differently maybe. Number 2 is being able to understand where people's what kind of value drivers they have and really knowing them very, very well. So you can then connect the dots between what you're saying and what you want to do. And then to your point, and it's a great one, is sort of like what those objectives are. So what are the business objectives? And then how do you tie the work and the team and the capability that you've got and the toolkit you have to help them achieve those business objectives? Every business person that I've walked into, I've always said, I'm here to help you achieve your business goals. So let's start there. Right. And then I think about, okay, what are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve? And then I back into, okay, here's the toolkit and here's how we can use it to help you achieve those goals. You have that conversation, right? No one's going to say, I don't understand what you do. Right? They might tell you, I thought you were about surveys, right? Or NPS or customer satisfaction scores. But that's a very different conversation to be having. And that's where CX becomes really real and people start to really understand the power of it.
And I like that you add that part, and I only laugh because it's amazing how often when you either meet with a new group of individuals or a new business that you're working with that does not have a ton of experience or a ton of exposure to some of the things that people like us are doing inside of customer experience, customer success optimization, service optimization. I would argue even some of the best companies in the world that are growing rapidly right now, they've already introduced all of this into the way that they think about their inside sales. So it's already made its way into revenue curation and revenue optimization and the way that companies think about how they can get really, really good at scaling demand and scaling growth, right? But you're right. There's so much more to this world than just the survey or to the NPS or to the CSAT. And I love you. You're so similar to me, Bill, where you're constantly talking about like that stuff doesn't really truly matter. There's all these other components to thinking about building an incredible leading customer experience roadmap or strategy. And frankly, surveys and feedback and focus groups, they're chapters in the book, no doubt. They're things that are there that you can eventually, kind of stroke those chords when you need to, but it's a whole other game, man. And getting a team around a common set of goals and mission and direction is a big, big part of it. So, Bill, I'd love to jump into the first CX pillar of team, man. I'd love for you to kind of spend a couple minutes just talking about number one, you've been a part of all these different companies, and now you're at this incredible company, Medallia, where you guys are doing all these, you're helping all these other businesses think about how they can look at their signals, look at their insights, understand what type of areas for optimization are ripe out there, right? But I'd love to hear you kind of just talk about some of the things you learned along your journey around team, man. Some of the ideas or some of the major activities that have always kind of been your front and center focus as you've been building, leading, and managing some of the teams that you've been a part of building.
Yeah, look, so I prescribe to the philosophy of hire great people and get the hell out of their way, right? I don't have all the answers. I mean, much like you, like speaking to folks who've been in customer experience for a long time, week in and week out, you realize quickly that you do not have all the answers. It's like it's a great exercise in humility, actually. And I'll give you a great case in point. So when I started at Freddie Mac, there was no team there. I mean, it was 4 people. They were doing some qualitative interviews, and we had to create a vision and a mission we could all stack hands on. And we did that collectively as a team. We hired, we had someone in the design space. A VOC leader was just hired before I started there. And ultimately we built out those teams more, but then we're like, you know what? We need change management people. We're going to bring in change management folks to help us really perpetuate this sort of philosophy throughout the organization. And there it's about, finding the best talent, not just from a technical perspective, but again, those soft skills are like super important. And they're different from a design perspective than they are even from like a VOC or analytics perspective, right? On the design side, typically you're going to get really, folks who are doing like facilitation and that sort of stuff, typically like great communication skills, can engage an audience. On the VOC and analytics side, traditionally, I found personally that maybe the communication skills or being able to communicate the value, right? Because they're so in the weeds on data, isn't something that's strong. So it's about being able to find that purple squirrel sometimes and say, okay, you've got both. You can talk about it, but you can do the work and you can kind of help your team. We were lucky to find just an absolutely amazing leader in that space. And then on the change side, once we added, just like, okay, do you have the technical capability to actually do this work? But again, if you're doing change management, it's not just following an ADKAR model, right? Awareness down to like, through those stages, you need to influence an entire organization. Yeah. So those soft skills, you really got to test and learn, and bring on the type of talent that's going to energize an organization. And when I look at sort of team members, personally, I look for 3 things, like, outside of the technical stuff, I think is really important. I like to dig deep on, how do you manage and lead teams? How do you manage and lead yourself? Where you get your motivation from? And then, as well, like, how do you deal with like difficult situations? Because, as well as anybody in this work, you're going to hit a lot of roadblocks. Yeah. People are going to say no. Yeah. And you've got to keep on pushing until, like, there's an old saying, don't take no from someone who can't tell you yes. So, you got to keep on pushing until you find that person who can tell you yes and listen and drive some action around the customer. And that's not easy work. A lot of people don't have the stomach for that.
100% agree with you. There's a few immediate thoughts that I want to poke on, which is, number one, like when you're inside of some of these companies and you're leading their voice of customer task force, or you're listening their customer centricity task, whatever you're calling it in your business, you just nailed it, Bill. I would argue you have now two ways. I think it's personally one of the coolest roles in any business or job, mainly because you get tentacles into every single part of the business. You're involved in sales, you're involved in service, you're involved in marketing, you're involved in ops, you're involved in product. If you're doing your job really well, by the way, you're involved in every single one of the data is, analytics has to be, you probably have your best friends sitting inside of that game because they can show you windows, or they can show you potential paths of what we're seeing across trends or themes or different types of data points that we're getting better at collecting. But the other part is, I say a little bit different, Bill. You almost have to be like a rock star to be able to make that type of group of SMEs who are probably, number one, some of the brightest people in your organization, if they're running those different those different roles in those different areas. But like anything else in life, you need to be able to command attention, command respect. You do need to be phenomenal at being able to socialize the learnings and the findings. And then you also have to do it in a way where, let's just call it what it is, Bill. Every single business in the world, especially as they get bigger, politics are involved and people are involved. And feelings are involved. And then there's all these other rules that really kind of come into the mix as the business gets bigger. You need to be able to balance all of those variables. It's not an easy job, and it's definitely not the type of thing that you can do without really kind of mastering a deep playbook from an IQ and an EQ perspective.
Yeah, look, you said it really, really eloquently and perfectly. I think that, for CX leaders today, I think, you've got to have sort of like multiple kind of hats, right? Like you need a technician, you need someone who's like a good influencer, good people skills. You need someone who kind of can be a little bit visionary to say, this is where this is going. And here's from a company perspective, the strategy and where we want to go as a company. How does that tie into where we want to go from a customer or an employee perspective? There are a lot of different hats that you do need to master and work on. And that's why I said before, it's not really for the faint of heart. I don't mean to like put like, CX people for me are on a pedestal, frankly, because they do have to engage so many different parts of the business versus like a marketing or versus like, like an operations or maybe a sales leadership role. But I think that's where like the fun of the role comes in. Agreed. I will say one important thing to this though, you do have to get involved with all these other businesses, but the folks that I've seen really successful in this space come at it from that, just like you're like, hey, I'm trying to come at it from the customer's perspective. You need to come at it from their perspective. Because if you're going at it from the perspective of, here are our scores, here's the work that we do, we're going to give it to you, you're going to create, we'll create more visibility. Like that's all well and good. But I think where a lot of folks kind of fall down sometimes is when they don't try to understand their business deeply. And then say, here's the toolkit I have, here's how I can help you be successful, versus I'm going to measure, I'm bringing together all these signals, et cetera. That's important, but you still need to come at it from their perspective. And if you're not doing that, if you're not being empathetic and you're not helping them think about how to achieve their business goals and the overall sort of vision of the company and be accretive to that process, I think that's where a lot of teams kind of break down.
You're absolutely right. And I think, one of the simplest ways that I've tried to kind of do what Bill is saying, even in my own career, and then certainly with all the clients that we work with at CX Chronicles, but it's almost like a mirror, Bill. It's like you just nailed it. You got to be taking, yes, you're understanding all of the customer drumbeat, the customer heartbeat, the customer pulse. You got to understand all that stuff, no doubt about it. But if you want to get actual change, and if you actually want to get actual buy-in, and you want to get things built, you want to get things implemented, you want to get things rolled out throughout an organization, you almost have to be spending the other half of your time doing the exact same thing on the employee experience and the employee journey side. Because what I've learned, especially as I've gotten deeper into my own career, it's exactly what you're saying, Bill, is if you're not spending time with the employees, understanding their processes, understanding their challenges. I mean, think about it. Like even it's easy for people sitting back in headquarters to say, why isn't sales doing this? And why isn't local ops doing that? And why are these different geos doing that? And then you get on an airplane and you go fly out and you get to spend a week or two with those people in the field, seeing how difficult their jobs are, how hard it is to get a customer on the other end, how difficult it is to input everything into the CRM, how your own tool actually probably sucks a little bit from a usability perspective. And then it's funny because you're right. The best CXers in the world, the best CX leaders in the world that are thinking about this stuff, they're almost building two different journeys and two different playbooks that they bring back to HQ. And then you do this like reflective assessment of all the different, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and how you could actually start to make some impact. So I love that idea, man. It's a really, really good idea for our listeners to be thinking about and kind of bring it back to their own team and their own businesses today.
Cool. And that's, I think that's a big, look, and as obviously, if you're leading a CX team, large or small, I don't know if the balance is even 50-50. I think you got to be doing like 80%
good point,
out
Bill.
there in the business, understanding them and talking about the value of the team, and then seeing here's how we can use the toolkit to continue to drive growth, continue to find operational efficiencies, to continue to improve culture, like those three primary goals. And then 20%, maybe you're kind of getting in the weeds with your team or, et cetera. I think that's indicative of any leadership role, but I think the influence and the constant buy-in and constant selling as a CX leader is way more enhanced maybe than other roles that I've, been partnering with or I've seen.
Yep. I love it. Bill, I'd love to jump into the second CX pillar of tools. So number one, across your journey, you got to work with a bunch of different types of toolkits, everything from whatever software is required to run a diner, all the way up to these huge CX and CS teams that are like working with some super impressive global badges. I'd love to just kind of hear how, take a couple minutes to talk about tools. Some of the things that you've either learned across your journey that have been really difficult as a company grows or as a company scaling. And then some of the things that just frankly, if you can just pinpoint your focus on tools, some of the handful of things that that any leader could really kind of shine just by focusing on a couple items as it comes to toolkit optimization and just general tool usage.
Yeah. So a couple of things. So, and not a pitch for my current company, although, Medallia is a great company. I'm not going to discount that at all. I think that the modern CX team cannot be successful unless they have an experience management platform in place. And, a lot of that has to do with, and this is, our philosophy at Medallia is we want to democratize insights to the entire organization so they can then take that and act on it on behalf of the customer. Like putting this into the hands of operators every single day. As a CX leader, that's got to be like just a primary goal and objective. And the reason for that is one, if you are focused on things like CSAT or NPS, it's going to invariably, it'll start to increase your scores over time. More importantly though, and what I've observed is that these platforms are culture drivers, right? If you're an operator, you might actually have a tough time trying to figure out how does my day-to-day impact the customer? But then when you have data to actually show you how that's happening, right? You fundamentally find purpose in that role and you're able to make that connection and measure your performance. That really is transformative. So I think from a tech stack perspective, I think one, having a platform is really important. Number two is I was always a big believer in fewer the better and just making sure that, the integrations between the two work really, really well. One, from a pure risk perspective, you don't want 4 different platforms, right? One, it's tough to manage. 2, it's risky to your organization, right? And managing that risk, I think, is something that a lot of companies these days really do care about. So taking that lens to it, I think is really important. Number 3, I was always like, I want to consolidate as much as possible. And I was a customer of Medallia's for 5 years before I joined the company. I wanted to consolidate so much into one platform because I wanted the analysis and the view to really be able to come together into one place versus having multiple different spots and then having to go do the work outside, because that requires a whole new one. It requires a new platform. 2, it requires new resources that you got to go sell the business on, right? Which is never easy to do. And number 3, at some point, you start looking at different platforms and saying, which one is more valuable to me than the next, right? So finding a platform that can do multiple things for you, understanding what's happening with your customers through the journey is super, super important. And that integration piece with your MarTech stack, with your contact center, whatever that is, I think that is a really critical piece, because at the end of the day, you need data flowing through different systems, right? Whether that's Salesforce, whatever that is. And you do not want to be burning your IT organization with workarounds and manual processes. You want that flowing as easily as humanly possible. And then finally, look for good people who actually are practitioners working there. You want them to know what your pains are, right? You want them to know the types of questions where you are in your own journey from a maturity perspective in CX or EX, and saying, hey, you've been there and done that. What obstacles did you face, right? What were your pain points? Because they could be different, but what can we learn as a team, from that company? I think those are 3 really important things to be looking at from a technology perspective.
I love it, man. I think so a couple points that I hear this all the time, Bill, from some of our guests, but one of the first ones I just want to call out is this idea of take a minute to look at, or get better yet, have a handful of your SMEs kind of around the table and take a minute to do a toolkit audit, whether it's number 1, just listing out every single one of the pieces of software that's helping to drive or grow or scale or operate your business today. That's number 1. Then take a few different cuts on it. Look at which of those tools or which of those SaaS solutions are being utilized at a high clip, a medium clip, a low clip. Then after that, then somebody else, and maybe it's not everybody on the team, but then somebody a little bit higher up in your company needs to take a look at some of the back end economics of that. How much are you paying for that tool? How much are the licensing fees? How much are you spending every single solitary month for all these tools? And then immediately do a cross reference to see, okay, the tools that aren't being used at all, but are costing X amount of dollars. But here's the other thing that you just said that I love, Bill, and I talk about this constantly with our clients, is there's almost like an opportunity cost every time you add a new piece of technology or a new tool into a company's purview. And the opportunity cost is around, it's almost like a distraction, right? So if all you really need them doing is spending 80% of their time in either their CX experience management platform or their CRM, or maybe it's their issue resolution management system. But every time you add a new piece of technology, you're essentially throwing up another neon billboard on the highway that kind of draws people's heads away from where you want the focus. And so many companies, even these brilliant companies, Bill, that are doing these ridiculous things, they miss this on a regular basis. So, and then the second thing is this, is just this idea of like context switching or context mitigation, I think is one of the biggest things that CX and CS leaders need to really be thinking about. And you just said it in a slightly different way, but like, what are the 2 or 3 tools that you need your team to be able to understand from top to bottom, east to west, understand everything about it, understand what's expected of them from a usability perspective. But then the other part is like, get them almost addicted to the form of, that's where your morning and your evening news is going to be forever, right? And you bring them there on a regular basis so that then you have utilization, you have adoption, you have familiarity with the product or with the solution, and then you start to tell your story in those places. And even as companies get really, really big, the companies that do it well, they're constantly doing the morning, the afternoon, and the evening news in those spaces. And I think a lot of companies need to think about that, Bill.
Yeah, and that democratization that I mentioned, that's not just for like operators day to day, right? Like your CEO, if like they're invested in the customer, and no CEO will tell you otherwise, you really getting the technology to them in a digestible way, not just sending like a PowerPoint deck. I mean, like actually having like an app on their phone where they can see what's happening with a customer every single day and be able to drill down and say, what's wrong here? I realize that some CEOs, well, every CEO is really busy, but giving them the capacity to be able to look at that every day and create conversation and dialogue with their own leadership around it on a regular basis, I think is insanely important. It's just different formats to be able to digest in, right?
Yep.
So, that's one more thing just to be able to add is just like, when you think about the technology, does it have something from the top of the house all the way down to the individual operator, and be able to, create some kind of platform or view that will support them in their day to day.
Yep. Couldn't agree more, Bill. Bill, I'd love to dive into the third CX pillar of process. And we've kind of hit on some of this a little bit. And where I'd love for you to go is, you mentioned change management earlier in the conversation, but I'd love to kind of hear, what are some of the ways that you've thought about sort of wrangling or optimizing or just managing the way that a business has to think about its process, whether it's living playbooks, whether it's SOPs, whether it's different types of, content guides. What are some of the things that have worked really well for you and your teams as you've kind of thought about wrangling process?
So I'm a big framework person. The thing that's really worked for me over the years has been essentially just think about it like a pyramid where, you 3 pillars. I know you got 4, man. But my 3 pillars have always been insights, design, experience design, and culture. And being in that culture piece largely is sort of a change management component. And then being able to identify what are the behaviors from an employee perspective, but also what are the capabilities across those 3 that you should start to see as you start to evolve and grow as a business from a CX maturity perspective. I've actually laid these out. This is going back to my days, like way back at Credit Suisse. The team and I, we laid these out. We were able to score the business on this sort of maturity model. And we use that as a basis for, okay, this business is over here. This business is slightly more mature, and here's why. And then being able to work with those different business lines to align them and kind of bring them all up to speed, and being able then to say, okay, based on business outcomes and results, based on customer outcomes and results, here's what we're seeing, right? One business versus another. So if you want their metrics, right, you need to start putting these things into place. And I think that, making it, just grounding people in like real, like, okay, behavior and capability, just makes it very real for people. So I've always used that everywhere I've gone. I mean, I've switched it up here and there, but like, depending on the business. but that has served really, really well. And I think that's important to be able to establish not only credibility for you and the team, but also a process for you and a path for that business to go down together with a shared understanding and vision of, okay, where are we going to go? And then what is it going to look like when we get there? How is it going to feel? And, when you get to that top of the pyramid, like what should our customers be saying? Like what's going to be, or employees even, what's going to be different about this business?
I love that. Bill, what are some of the ways that you've been able to kind of include your teams in the way that you, because I hear you loud and clear, that's a phenomenal way of approaching it, but how do you get the teams involved in terms of, that sounds like a lot more, you made that sound very simple. It sounds like it's a lot of work. What are some what are some of the ways that you've been able to kind of use your teams, leverage some of the awesome guys and gals that are on these teams to be able to kind of come around that idea and to be able to create that story and create the way that you can actually start to show that there are these different paths forward for any given business, or maybe it's a project, maybe it's a specific initiative.
Yeah. I think it's just getting people like any kind of classic leadership kind of lesson, right? I think it's just making sure that everyone on your team is clear on what their role is and the impact that they are having on the business and can have, for that matter, right? Having a scorecard for your team, right? Not for the business, but for your team. Like, how are we engaging? Like, are we engaging the right people? Do you eat some of your own kind of dog food, right? Like, ask people how you're doing. Like, are you aligning to their businesses and objectives? Are you having an impact on the strategy of that business, like others in the organization are having? So constantly having those conversations and measuring, just what's your own yardstick and like, how do you want to evolve and get better every day? But again, like, if you're hiring good people, you got to let them go do the work too, right? But again, just being really clear with everybody and like, here's our team, here's what we do, here's your role in that success, right? And here's what my expectations are as a leader, but go do it. And anyone worth their salt is gonna, I hope, is gonna look at that and say, I'm running my own business here, right? I'm gonna treat it as such. So if I'm on the change management side, what are the things that I'm doing to help people understand what CX is, help people understand what the value is, being able to promote sort of CX wins as well as CX learnings, like, or, I call, losses learnings, right? Like where there are bad experiences, what are we learning from them? How are we changing and evolving the business as a result? And how are we leveraging insights, analytics put into a design thinking process to be able to go drive and affect change? And, those three things coming together could be really, really powerful. You get some bumps and bruises along the way, just like anybody else, right? But like, just look, okay, what do we do wrong? What do we learn? What are we gonna do like differently next time, right? And keep going.
I think one of the things that you've made me think about, I think every single solitary one of our listeners should be pausing right here and writing this down and adding it to this week's goals. But this idea of team or department-based scorecards and SWATs just kind of slapped me right in the face, Bill, with what you said, because there's for a few reasons. Number one, at big companies, even not even big companies, guys, at well-funded startups and growth companies that are hoping to be tomorrow's leaders in the mid-market and the enterprise side, some of the folks that are running these teams and these departments are paid a tremendous amount of money on an annual basis. That should almost be a table stake in today's leadership.
Yeah, because and it's not though.
And it's not. Oh, and I get that. Look, this is why there's companies like CXChronicles that are thrilled to come in and help companies do scorecards, do working assessments, do quantified views of how your different teams or different leadership folks are stacking up. But when you say it like that, Bill, you're right. It's almost like, how does any team or department leader actually have a compass? How do they know what's north, what's south, what's west? If I would argue on a quarterly basis, maybe we give it a little leniency, but like on a biannual basis, every 6 months, it should be relatively easy for a bunch of really smart people to give their executive leadership team a proper scorecard, a proper SWOT analysis, a proper directional view. Because I imagine what I'm thinking is when you lay that out across sales, marketing, ops, product, analytics, et cetera, Bill, you can immediately see gaps. You could immediately see where resources are required to build bridges, and you could immediately see where certain folks or different positions on the pitch are requiring a little extra oomph to get them over the hump or to get them to the next level of the game.
Yeah, totally right. Like, and like I said, like it's one thing to have that for the business, but a complete other thing to have your own, turn that on yourself as well, and to be honest in terms of, are we having the value that we were hoping to have on this organization, and just being open and honest about like, here's what we didn't do as well as we wanted to do. Here's what we're going to do next year that's going to be different and better. Here's where we had a lot of success and we're able to impact and drive like real change for the company and the customer and the employee. So, getting a real understanding and have someone on the change management side, like really own that. And be able to constantly showcase the impact that you and the team is having, I think is super important. In not just in CX roles, I think you got to do that in every role, but I think in CX more than any other role, because it's a little bit more fuzzy to folks.
Yep.
So if you can quantify that value in revenue, efficiency, whatever that quantification is, hard, real numbers, I think you need to spend a lot of effort on that side. Because you do, unfortunately, you do have to justify the work that you're doing every day. That's part of the role.
Yep. Couldn't agree more. Bill, I'd love to jump into the fourth and the final CX pillar of feedback. So, and feel free to kind of bring this in whichever direction you think makes the most sense. But I'd love to just kind of hear some ideas or some of the lessons or some of the things that you've learned along your journey around ways that you can be really, really thoughtful about your customer feedback and ways that you can be really, really thoughtful about your employee feedback.
So, well, there's one way to do both. It's act on the feedback at the end of the day. So like, people come to me and say like, hey, I want to, even after this podcast, I'm talking to someone about someone whose like MPS system isn't working the way that they wanted to. And I can guarantee you, they're not acting on the feedback as a business, right? In the right way. Right. Without even knowing what the problem is. So I think acting on feedback is really important, whether that's employees or whether that's customers, number one. Number two is, I think feedback, like direct feedback through a survey or someone's taking notes somewhere and it's captured in Salesforce and you're analyzing that feedback. I think that today, as we talk a lot about signals at Medallia, right? And a signal is a survey for sure, but a signal is also someone on social media saying this was a great experience or this was a poor experience and here's why. Right? So financial data are signals, operational data, another signal, et cetera. Being able to piece those signals through the journey is now really where the work is going, because only then can you then get away from, I've got my 6 personas and I'm going to kind of design towards those 6 and really start to drive towards personalization at scale. Right. And again, that's very action oriented and driven. Right. So how do I change the experience while the customer is going through it using technology to automate that process to keep them, down sort of that path, where as a business, we achieve our goals, but we also make the experience better for that customer. I'll give you a real example. You want to go get a new mortgage. You want to go refi your mortgage. Okay. A lot of people are doing that today, kind of given where rates are, everyone's kind of rushing to refi or even buy homes. You go to a bank's website and you go to the mortgage site and you look at a rate and you're like, I'm not paying that rate. And you kind of bounce out. Right. And maybe that's your bank. Maybe you go into your, checking and savings, kind of look at balances. By the like journey orchestration is about surfacing a new rate, because that platform understands who you are and understands that you dropped out because that rate wasn't sufficient enough. So you actually they might surface a lower rate for you that makes you click and makes you go down that mortgage journey path. Right. So the business achieves its goals. You get actually a better experience because you're able to accomplish a task that you went to that site to do. And everybody kind of wins. And I think being able to think about, how do I act in different ways, not just in, I've got survey feedback, I'm going to give it to the banker down in the branch and they can go make a change at some point. That's also important, but really at scale, understanding like, how do we act in different ways through the doors that our customers come through every day, whether that's the contact center, in-app, branch, whatever that might be.
I love it. It's some of the things that we're doing with our clients right now at CXC Bill. It's exactly what you're talking about. We'll actually help to build customer feedback roadmap views, because a lot of companies, no one takes the time to just draw the map. So like, for example, you have sales and marketing using these 3 tools to get a bunch of signals, a bunch of insights, and a tremendous amount of data. And then they just live in their own little tribe over there using with that. Then you move down the line, you get into customer success and you get into your customer facing team. They have loads and loads and loads of information about all the activities that are happening to service that portfolio. They've got the phone calls, they've got the emails, they've got text messages, they've got tickets, they've got all this fun stuff to work with. and then that tribe, they play with that information all day long.
And
then you go down to product and usability, and you see the same thing. It's like the people literally using your app, using your website, using your product, using the thing that you're selling, and they've got all that information. And you're right, man. It's like the faster you can just stitch together the story on a journey, on a holistic journey, and then start getting those same folks kind of looking at that holistic view, that's where there's so much opportunity for optimizing not just the customer experience, but most employees and most of the smartest people in the world that like showing up at work every day, they prefer to be at a place that's kind of having that type of collaboration and that type of socialization and that type of intimacy around being able to see what other teams and other departments and other roles and other leaders are doing within their space.
Absolutely. Right. People, look, you want to work for a company that's winning, right? No one wants to work for a company that's losing. So, creating that horizontal view, I think is, the next kind of like 2, 3, maybe even 4 or 5 years, where not just the horizontal view is created and is visible, but also as an organization, you're not changing the way structurally you're organized horizontally, but you're starting to bring people together horizontally to see that full picture. I mean, even at Freddie Mac, we started putting, you had sort of in the agile function, we started giving them sort of customer data and said, okay, you now own a portfolio of product teams. You're essentially a journey owner. We created it's a Forrester concept. It's called a journey atlas.
Okay.
And there we had 6 primary experiences, I think 36 underlying journeys. And we used that sort of as a roadmap and a guide to help us understand what's happening through these primary experiences and all these journeys. And how does it, as you go through those experiences as a client, like what's happening as you're going through.
Yep.
If you're like in a classic servicing kind of, mode as a customer, like the stuff that happens upstream is still really important, and you've got to be able to manage that. So, we lit it up red, amber, green like a Christmas tree. It was really cool visual. A lot of great work happening there.
I like that. Bill, before we wrap up, I'd love for you to spend a minute or two, talk about your show, man. You got an awesome podcast. Definitely a huge fan. Learned a ton. I hope that the folks that are listening to this show every single week, I hope that they're getting the same thing. But like with Bill's show, he's got these incredible folks, incredible stories, incredible lessons. Take a minute or two just to tell us the story about how you built your podcast, how you built your community, and just certainly where people can go find out more about it so that we can continue to cross-pollinate and show other CX and CSers all the different information and awesome stories that are out there.
Well, I appreciate the question because I don't get asked that question a lot. I started the podcast because there's way too much like theory out there. From CX and EX perspective, and not enough like real just tactical, like how do you do this stuff? Much like the stuff you're doing, right? The conversations that you're having every day, and being able to bring that to people so they can learn and grow and do better at their jobs. That is what is important to me. I was really lucky in my 20 plus years doing this work that I had some really interesting people that would help me along the way. I could raise my hand, ask questions, and they were always there. And I wanted to bring that out to folks, and hopefully we're doing that today. So, the show has listeners in over 90 countries. I think we'll hit 100 countries this year, which is pretty awesome, cool. Pretty cool thing. And we just got nominated for Best Business Podcast. We won Best Business Podcast last year in the Cool Podcast Awards. Much like your show, right? Like it comes down to 2 things. Like it's the guest and their depth, but also the questions that you're asking. And, every show is not the same, and keeping it fresh for listeners. And more than anything, I will also add though, and probably the same for you, I'm going to venture, is like, it's been an incredible just learning and growth hack for me. Just, big time. Talking to different people all the time, getting to understand how they did it and how they were successful, and like just knowing you don't have all the answers has just been an eye-opening experience, and just one that's just been really incredible for me personally.
I love it. Well, look, keep up the incredible work, and congratulations on those on what you just mentioned, because you deserve it, man. It's an awesome show, awesome content, great substance. And you just nailed it. Same thing with me, man. It's for folks out there that are thinking about what's a way that you can continue to get deeper or further ahead, or mastering your craft, or mastering your trade, whatever it is, guys, literally whatever it is. Take some time to go talk to other incredible folks who have done, if not the same, even better, double, triple the amount of work and at-bats and time and hours and energy thinking about a specific thing. And you will be blown away at how quickly you learn so much more than you ever thought you could learn about a specific space or a specific topic. So it is absolutely an incredible life hack.
Yeah. And look, the show's on, you can go to becustomerled.com, becustomerled.com. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. If you ever want to just chat about what you're doing and how you could do it better, like I'm always down for that. I have plenty of those conversations each week, just new people just reaching out and saying, hey, I saw what you put out there. Can you talk more about it? I am willing to spend 30 minutes or whatever time people need, like in this space, like all day long. So feel free to reach out.
Well, Bill Staikos, thank you so much for joining the CX Chronicles podcast. It's been our absolute pleasure. And I definitely look forward to keeping the conversation going forward with you in the future, my friend.
Yeah, it's been an honor. I appreciate you having me on the show.